The frigid air bit at Amora's cheeks as she clutched her groceries, walking quickly down the dimly lit street. She could feel the eyes on her, the muffled whispers that pierced the cold silence. A group of teenagers stood at the corner, their laughter sharp and cutting. One of them sneered, "Go back to where you came from." The words hit her like a slap, and her steps faltered. Her heart pounded, tears burning in her eyes as she kept walking, pretending not to hear. She didn't dare look back. This wasn't the first time she had encountered such hostility, but it didn't hurt any less. In that moment, Amora felt the crushing weight of her reality. She was far from home, isolated, and seen as an outsider in a place she desperately wanted to belong. Amora's journey to this foreign land had begun with a spark of hope. Growing up in a small African village, she had always been curious about the world beyond the savannah. Her father, a schoolteacher, had instilled in her a love for learning, and her mother's unwavering support fueled her dreams. When she received a scholarship to study engineering abroad, it felt like a miracle. "This is your moment," her mother had said, holding her tightly at the airport. "Make us proud." Amora had boarded the plane with a heart full of excitement and a head full of dreams. But as the plane descended into the sprawling city of Riverside, she couldn't have known the challenges that awaited her. From the moment Amora stepped off the plane, the stark contrast between her vibrant village and the bustling city was overwhelming. The towering buildings, the constant hum of traffic, and the cold, grey skies were nothing like the warm, sunlit landscapes she had left behind. Her apartment, a small, dimly lit space, felt more like a cage than a home. She spent hours staring out the window, watching strangers hurry by, their faces void of warmth. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of her neighbors arguing or the distant wail of sirens. Each creak and groan of the old building reminded her how alone she truly was. In her classes, Amora's isolation grew. Her classmates were polite but distant. They spoke in rapid English, peppered with slang she didn't understand. At lunch, she sat alone, pretending to read or scrolling through her phone to avoid the sting of exclusion. Weekends were the hardest. With no friends to visit or family to comfort her, Amora wandered the city aimlessly, hoping to feel a connection to something, anything. She found herself lingering in parks, watching families laugh together, yearning for the companionship she once took for granted. Even the laughter of children in the distance would bring tears to her eyes, reminding her of her younger siblings back home. Though Amora had studied English in school, the language felt like a wall she couldn't climb. In lectures, the professors spoke quickly, their words blending into an incomprehensible stream. She struggled to take notes, often missing key points. Group projects were a nightmare, her ideas were either ignored or misunderstood, and she began to doubt her intelligence. Her part-time job as a cashier was no easier. Customers grew impatient when she hesitated, stumbling over unfamiliar words. Some spoke to her as if she were a child, their condescension cutting deeper than their words. Others avoided her altogether, their cold stares making her feel invisible. Determined to improve, Amora spent her evenings practicing English. She watched television with subtitles, repeating phrases until her tongue ached. She recorded herself speaking, cringing at her mistakes but pushing forward. Progress was slow, and the frustration often brought her to tears. Still, she refused to give up, reminding herself that every small victory brought her closer to her goals. Amora's struggles were compounded by the racism she encountered daily. From subtle microaggressions to outright hostility, she faced a constant barrage of reminders that she was different. At the grocery store, a cashier once scrutinized her ID card as if it were fake, her eyes filled with suspicion. On the bus, people avoided sitting next to her, their discomfort palpable. The incident with the teenagers was one of many. Each encounter chipped away at her self-esteem, leaving her questioning her worth. "Why do they hate me?" she often wondered. "What have I done to deserve this?" Despite the pain, Amora tried to focus on her studies and her goals. She reminded herself of her family's sacrifices, of the hopes they had placed in her. But the weight of it all, the loneliness, the language barrier, the racism, began to take a toll on her mental health. Finding a place to live had been another uphill battle. Landlords were reluctant to rent to her because she was new to the country, and when she did find a place, it was far from ideal. The heating barely worked, and the walls were so thin that she could hear every movement of her neighbors. She often lay awake at night, listening to the hum of the city and feeling the weight of her solitude. Financial struggles added to her stress. Despite her part-time job, the cost of living in Riverside was astronomical. Amora often skipped meals to save money, sending whatever she could back home to support her family. The burden of being the hope and provider for her loved ones became overwhelming, and she felt like she was carrying the weight of two worlds on her shoulders. There were moments when she contemplated giving up, but the thought of letting her family down kept her going. Perhaps the hardest part of all was the distance from her family. She missed her mother's comforting words, her father's wisdom, and the laughter of her younger siblings. Video calls helped, but they couldn't replace the warmth of a hug or the comfort of home-cooked meals. Guilt gnawed at her. She felt selfish for leaving them, for chasing her dreams while they struggled. Every time she heard her mother's tired voice on the phone, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The guilt was a shadow that followed her everywhere, deepening her feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. She would lie awake, replaying their conversations, wishing she could do more to ease their burdens. Amora's vibrant spirit dimmed as depression took hold. She found it harder to get out of bed in the mornings, the prospect of facing another day filled with challenges too daunting to bear. Her appetite dwindled, and she lost weight. The once bright spark in her eyes faded, replaced by a hollow emptiness. Some nights, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of failure. Maybe I'm not strong enough, she thought. Maybe I don't belong here. Her grades began to slip, and she withdrew further from her classmates. Calls home became infrequent. She didn't want to worry her family. When her mother asked how she was doing, Amora forced a smile and said, "I'm fine, Mama. Everything's fine." But inside, she felt like she was drowning. Everything changed one rainy afternoon when Amora met Mrs. Harper, an elderly woman who frequented the local library. Amora had been sitting in a corner, her head in her hands, when Mrs. Harper approached her. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice gentle and kind. Amora hesitated but found herself opening up, sharing her struggles and fears. Mrs. Harper listened without judgment, her eyes filled with compassion. "You're not alone," she said, placing a hand on Amora's shoulder. "I know it feels that way now, but there are people who care. Let me help you." Mrs. Harper became a lifeline for Amora. She introduced her to local community groups, where Amora met others who had faced similar struggles. Together, they shared their stories, their laughter, and their tears. They became a second family, a source of strength and support. Amora also began sharing her culture with her new friends, teaching them about the rich traditions of her homeland. Her cooking, her stories, and her art became bridges that connected her to others. Through the community center, she joined a mentorship program that paired her with younger immigrants. Amora found a sense of purpose in guiding others through the challenges she had faced. Her mentees looked up to her, their admiration rekindling her confidence. With Mrs. Harper's encouragement, Amora started attending workshops to improve her public speaking. She shared her story at community events, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. Her courage inspired others, and she began to see the impact of her resilience. Amora's art, inspired by her journey, gained recognition in local galleries. Her intricate patterns told stories of struggle and triumph, of pain and hope. Each piece was a testament to her strength and her unwavering spirit. Just as Amora began to find her footing, she faced another setback. A sudden family emergency forced her to return home for a few weeks. Upon her return to Riverside, she discovered that her job had been filled and her spot in the community program was at risk due to her absence. The progress she had made felt as though it were unraveling. The loneliness returned with a vengeance, but this time, Amora had tools and people to help. With Mrs. Harper's guidance and the support of her community group, she fought her way back, reclaiming her place with renewed determination. She began writing a blog about her experiences, reaching an even wider audience. Her honesty and vulnerability resonated with readers, many of whom shared their own stories of struggle and resilience. Amora's voice became a beacon of hope for those who felt unseen. Years later, Amora stood before a packed auditorium, sharing her journey at a cultural diversity event. She spoke of the challenges she had faced and the lessons she had learned. "Resilience is not about never falling," she said, her voice steady and confident. "It's about finding the strength to rise again. And in rising, we discover the light that guides us forward." The audience rose to their feet, applauding her courage and honesty. Among them was Mrs. Harper, her eyes shining with pride.